Welcome to Storage Wars, Decoding the Microsoft 365 Cloud. My name is Levine, and I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I do all of the training sessions for all of these Microsoft applications at WSU, including OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint, the trifecta of cloud storage that your end users have access to. So today, really excited to be here with you to talk about some of the different connections between your Microsoft cloud storage options. So I know we're all vaguely aware that there's some connection between SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive. Your end users are aware of this connection, but it's not always clear what that connection is. And Microsoft keeps changing it. Like we were talking about, they sometimes put things one place and then change their mind. So we'll hopefully demystify all of that by the end of the session. Also want to talk about common frustrations and issues that your end users have. And you all are all users of Microsoft 365 too, so some of these might be issues you're experiencing as well. So I'm going to go over some of those common issues that I hear from people, as well as how to troubleshoot those issues, the more important thing. So I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you today. So here's where the magic decoder ring comes in. At the end of the session, I have a supplemental guide that I'm going to share with you with everything that I'm talking about today, plus stuff I don't have time to talk about today that I wish I had time to talk about with you. So fear not, if you can't grab a screenshot in time, you will have all of this information at the end of the session. Okay, so 2 disclaimers before we get started. First one is that change is always happening in Microsoft's world, right? I think we're all familiar with this. You log into Teams one day, it's entirely different than it was the day before. There's a new button, there's a new feature that wasn't there. So everything I'm telling you is accurate as of this moment today. Next week, all bets are off. So we'll just kind of use that as the first disclaimer. The second disclaimer is there's a lot of ways that your Windows admins can customize your tenant. So I'm going to point out a couple of things that I know for a fact might be customized a little bit from tenant to tenant, but there's a lot of ways that your mileage may vary. Okay, quick terminology check here. I don't know if any of you guys have noticed this, but Microsoft is really bad at naming things. And here's the first example. I'm using the term 365 cloud storage today, and Microsoft has other cloud storages that they'll refer to sometimes for admins. For today, I'm just talking about the cloud storage locations that your end users are accessing. So when they go into their 365 and pop open their waffle, they see 3 options: OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint. So that's kind of what I'm referring to today as the trifecta, which we're going to see is kind of a unifecta when we get down to it. Okay, before we jump into troubleshooting, I want to talk about a brief history. This is someone uploading a selfie to the cloud, by the way. Okay, so the OG, the original here is SharePoint. So SharePoint dates back to 2001, and it was originally invented with the goal of file sharing and collaboration. So people wanted to create simple document libraries, maybe set some simple permissions, a little bit of sharing and collaboration, but it's kind of your basic file sharing options. There were also back then simple pages, very, very simple intranet pages, but nothing like what we see today. So if any of you have used SharePoint prior to 2016, you remember some of these simple pages that used to exist. Those are now called classic SharePoint. This is Microsoft's term for old, is classic. What launched in 2016 is called the modern experience. So just to take you down memory lane, here's what a classic SharePoint site used to look like. Anyone getting nostalgic looking at that? And then the new modern experience, it's like a regular web page. You've got web parts you can incorporate. It looks as nice as anything that's created on the internet, quite frankly. But again, the intention is intranet usage. Okay, so that was SharePoint. OneDrive was launched in 2007, and there's some debate about the actual date it launched because there were 3 or 4 names that Microsoft went through. Again, trouble naming things. They named it several things, and they finally landed on OneDrive in 2007. So OneDrive was launched as a personal SharePoint library. So they basically took that foundation of a SharePoint site, assigned that document library to one user, and that's it. It's basically all it is. There's no page associated with the user's OneDrive. So this is why when you look at file options in SharePoint on the left here, OneDrive on the right, it looks like identical options. It's built on the same infrastructure. They're in the same order, almost the same options entirely. Now, I'm going to be talking about troubleshooting after kind of setting this foundation, but here's a troubleshooting tip at no extra charge. Sometimes people will call and say, I'm seeing the term my SharePoint. So on the right here, I generated a sharing link from my OneDrive. What's going on? This says my SharePoint. I thought this was in my OneDrive. So my SharePoint was one of the names that Microsoft was possibly selecting for OneDrive. It's stuck in a couple places like here. So links will say my SharePoint. On the left, you're seeing where a OneNote is stored, my SharePoint. If anyone asks you about my SharePoint, that's in their OneDrive or somebody's OneDrive. So Teams, last one on the scene, launched in 2017. I think a lot of us became better acquainted with this in 2020 for obvious reasons. But Teams gets a little bit frustrating with cloud storage. This involves both OneDrive and SharePoint file storage. So before I even get into that, another terminology situation in Teams, here at the app bar in Teams where your users see chat, calendar, Teams. There's an app in Teams called Teams in which they create Teams. So your users might be saying the word Teams correctly to refer to 3 potentially different things. It gets very frustrating. I'm in some training groups where they said, could they literally have called this anything but Teams in the app bar? So just for today, I'm going to be referring to the teams that they click on in their taskbar, the big whole application as the big teams. I'm going to call this Teams groups in their app bar because they are creating Microsoft 365 groups. And this is usually what I'll say during training as well, by the way. I'll say, let's just call these Teams groups. It'll kind of clear things up. It's not Microsoft official, but Microsoft official is everything is Teams. So there you have it. See also Copilot, right? Everything is Copilot. So by the way, another thing I'll mention sometimes to end users is to think about each of these apps in the app bar as entirely separate programs. They point to different storage locations. There's different retention policies on them sometimes. Just think of the big teams as a hub of applications. Each of these is kind of their own separate thing. Okay, so where does OneDrive come into play with the big teams? Going to paint with kind of a broad brush here. Your Microsoft Teams chat files, if you share a file with a user in your chat, if I'm chatting with you, I put an attachment in here, it's going into my OneDrive in a folder called Microsoft Teams chat files, and then permissions are set for you to access that file. Now, importantly, if you have expiration policies set on your Teams chats, your chat may expire, but that file is still living in the Microsoft Teams chat files folder. So if that's important, that's what's happening behind the scenes. Recordings, I'm going to come back and I have a beef with Teams recordings, but painting with a broad brush here. Commonly, if users are in a Teams meeting and they press record on that meeting, it's going into the person who presses record OneDrive in a folder called recordings. But I have more to say about that because there's more to it if they tweak certain settings. You're also going to see some other types of integration depending on what they're playing with in Teams. If they're playing with wikis, if they're playing with whiteboards, probably going to be in somebody's OneDrive. Okay, Teams groups, the little teams. Every single Teams group, no exception, is backed by a SharePoint site. The users create a team, a SharePoint site is created that is the backbone. So just kind of like Microsoft had SharePoint in existence and it used it as the backbone for OneDrive, it's also a backbone for Teams. Every Teams group has a SharePoint site attached to it. And this can kind of overwhelm the users sometimes. They'll think, oh, I don't want to get into SharePoint. I thought I was just making a team. I'm just a team owner. Well, they don't really have to ever visit the SharePoint site, but there's two things when we talk about troubleshooting that they may want to know about that requires that they go to SharePoint. So if your users have to go to SharePoint, this is the route I recommend. Taking them into a channel, files tab, and then look in the ribbon for open in SharePoint. That's my recommended route. It's the least scary route for your end users. They don't have to go through Microsoft 365 and search around for things. It takes them right to that document library. Okay, I had a beef with Teams meetings. Here's the whole story, but don't panic. You don't have to memorize this. I'm going to show you a trick. But if you just want to know what's happening behind the scenes, here's what's happening. So I made this chart for us. Okay, let's take the top line first. Who was invited to the meeting? If they invite a list of users, the next question is, how did you record the meeting? Almost every time somebody's pressed record in that meeting. And if they do, it's in that user's OneDrive. So that was the most common route, almost always what people are doing. If they've invited a list of users and the meeting options are set to auto record, here's my complaint. This recording is in the OneDrive of the first person to join the meeting. What about if I enable a green room? Then it's the first person who joined the green room. What? It makes no sense. It's so frustrating. And I hope this is one of the things that will be different in this guide for you in a few weeks. I don't know, but right now this is what happens. So it's super frustrating. What I've been telling users is just don't set it to auto record. It's just not worth the trouble. Now, of course, you could enable a lobby and have to admit every single user into your meeting. That would prevent this, but what a mess. How weird is that? That's my complaint of the day. The second string, by the way, is the less common one. They invite a channel instead of a group of members. If that's the case, it's in the Teams file of whatever channel that they invited. I don't see a lot of people doing that. You all look worried, and so I want to reassure you that if you're not going to remember that, that's okay. Most people aren't going to remember that. And if you memorize it, it'll be different in a month. So here's what you do. User says, I don't know where this meeting is recorded. I don't remember how it got recorded. You go to the chat associated with the meeting. Now this view is about to change, by the way, but today it looks like this. You'll find a link, and even in the future, you will see a link. It'll just look a little different. When you click on that link, it takes you to the stored location of that recording. There's where the file lives. You just click right on top of the file name. Oh, it's in this Levine characters OneDrive in a folder called recordings. So don't memorize all that stuff. Just that's what's happening. And I'm going to come back to this when I talk about meetings a little bit later in troubleshooting. Okay, in sum, really, really broad brush here. You saw some exceptions, but if users are doing something in chat, something in a meeting, it's probably in somebody's OneDrive. If it's happening in a team group, it's in a SharePoint site. That's the really broad brush. You can use that as the rule of thumb. Now, you've kind of seen that all roads lead back to SharePoint. And sometimes I'll hear people say, well, everything is SharePoint. Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint, it's all the same thing. And that's not incorrect. So every team is a SharePoint site. Every OneDrive is a SharePoint library. But I don't know if it's productive to tell that to end users because they perceive 3 different places to go in their waffle. They perceive 3 very different storage locations. So I don't usually go this far with any sort of end users. Oh, I'm gonna put this in your guide. I thought you, or in your supplemental information. This just came to me in my email after I started creating this presentation. I thought, wow, perfect timing, a history of SharePoint. So you'll have this in your PDF, but you can kind of follow the path from 1998 to today. You'll see they include OneDrive and Teams in here, by the way. Okay. End user empowered troubleshooting. Here's the fun part. Let's get to the problems and then we'll get to the solutions. This will be a play in 10 acts or so. So all of these things are real issues that people have reported to me, probably reported to you. Maybe you dread getting the calls about Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint. I hear that a lot from people. So I'm going to show you some solutions for some common problems. All of these, by the way, are things that your end users can do on their own. I understand not all end users want to do their own troubleshooting. So if that's the case, of course, you could remote in with them and help them. But some people actually like doing this and they find that they have a better literacy of the applications if they actually troubleshoot their own issues. So you never know. Long story short, all of these things require no admin privileges. You don't have to bother Windows admins who I'm pointing to. You can walk them through this or remote in with them and help them out. Okay, here's where the play starts. Is it possible to fill in the blank? So most recent one, is it possible for me to export my Teams chats? And you'll find that you aren't very confident answering questions about especially Teams because it changes every week. So you're thinking, okay, it wasn't possible last week. Is it possible this week? So let's see what you can do. I would bookmark this page, feedbackportal.microsoft.com, formerly known as User Voice, if you were ever familiar with that one. And so let's take the example, the second one on the screen. Is it possible for me to move channels from one team to another? And you're thinking, I don't know, it wasn't possible yesterday. Let me search in the feedback portal. You'll find that result and you can tell the user, it looks like they're considering this. And better yet, what I tell them is, okay, see how there's almost 39,000 people upvoting this? So first of all, you're not alone in wanting this. And second of all, let's both upvote it. When you upvote stuff in the feedback portal, you both get notifications when that status changes, which is very helpful. Feedback portal. Okay, here's the next one. Teams is broken. Well, this could be anything, right? So here's a few. Okay, I tried to make a channel and Teams crashed. I tried to chat with my colleague. Every time I try to chat, something closes out in my Teams. Who knows what's happening? So this is one thing. If I'm only allowed to tell you one troubleshooting tip, if someone said you only get to say one thing today, this is the one I would tell you. If there's something generally wrong with Teams, get them to a browser. Preferably a private browsing window if you can, incognito on Chrome or the private browsing window in Edge. And so we actually made a little video to show you what I mean here. So getting them into 365, going to the waffle, go into Teams in the actual browser. This rules out that desktop application issue. And I can't tell you how many times this can just solve your issue right off the bat. Did you really restart your machine? Can we sign you out and back into Teams again? Can we uninstall, reinstall as a last resort? But long story short, getting them to that browser will rule out whether is Teams having an issue, is your account having an issue, or is it something happening locally? Okay, next one. I can't find my files. I was moving a large amount of files within my team. I can't find them anymore. I don't know where I moved them to. I was creating a PowerPoint in the middle of a meeting and I don't know where it went. I don't remember. I just hit save. I don't know what the default location is. So regardless, can't find some sort of files that they were working with. Microsoft 365 search. So get the users logged into Microsoft 365 online, and that search bar at the top searches their entire Microsoft 365 experience. OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint, even other people's OneDrive who have shared content with them. It's anything they have permission to access. Now here's where one of the caveats comes in for admin settings. Copilot is a whole separate topic, but there are discussions nationally about disabling this search tenant by tenant to assist with what Copilot is accessing. I only tell you this in case your tenants decide to restrict this search, which would be sad because it is a great troubleshooting tip for when people lose files. I've had a user, by the way, who was moving a large amount of files in her team, and she moved it in the SharePoint side of the team, but outside of a channel. So this kind of helped us find those files.
You don't think Microsoft would restrict that search on the Copilot side versus the?
What I'm told is that Copilot in 365 bases their access off of their Microsoft 365 access. And if you disable that search, it's supposed to disable that activity in Copilot, but I can't confirm that for sure. It's all rumor at this point. A couple more things about the search. So I don't know where my file is. It was called finance. I made this in the middle of a meeting, so I've searched for finance. You can see when you're searching, you can further narrow this down by file type. It's an Excel file made 2 weeks ago. Can I help you find it? And then you can even narrow it down further if you want to just SharePoint. You go to SharePoint, searches their SharePoint experience, or even a specific site itself. The search kind of changes depending on where you are in 365. Okay, I'm still on can't find my files, but this is one that no matter what they say, check the recycle bin. Another true story. I have a OneNote notebook that my team shares. It's just gone. I don't know where it went. The whole OneNote notebook is gone. So recycle bin, both in OneDrive or any SharePoint/team site, you can find that recycle bin on the left side of your screen typically. And the retention policy for recycle bins are 93 days by default. So 3 months, you can get back there and find that file. And do yourself a favor and scroll all the way to the bottom of their recycle bin to find the second stage recycle bin. That's where I found the OneNote notebook that this person had deleted and purged, apparently. Now, OneDrive users will have access to this. SharePoint site owners and team owners will also have access to that recycle bin. However, remember with teams, you've got to get to that SharePoint site that's associated with it. So that recycle bin right now, as of today, you can't get to from the team side. You have to get to SharePoint. And the same thing's going to go for my next problem. Okay, someone saved over my data. Another true story. Faculty member collaborating with the student. We have an Excel file. The student typed over a bunch of my data. It was saved in a team. So we can get to, you know what I'm going next, version history. So again, defaults, your mileage may vary in your tenant, but you have up to 500 versions of each document in OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint. So accessing this on the More menu next to any given file, and with her, you can kind of see on the right side, you can see who had last modified the file and the last modified date. So with her, let's find the last one you modified and confirm the date, restore that version. Now, right now, version history, also you can only get to from the SharePoint side of a team. But those are really the only 2 things that are that way anymore. It used to be when Teams first launched, you had to get to the SharePoint side to do almost anything with files. So maybe it'll all become available on the Teams side someday. That would be nice. Here's open, yeah.
When you have versions of those files, you have 1.0 and 2.0. Do you ever get a 1.5 version?
I've seen those before. Yeah, it's like a subversion. I don't know what that's all about. Yeah, I think they have to toggle that on, but that's a SharePoint site thing, right? Yeah. Sometimes what people will ask there too is, well, am I totally overwriting my current version? It actually just creates an entirely additional version. So if I were to restore version 1.0, which I'm poised to do in this picture, I just have 3 versions. So there's really no commitment involved with it. You could just restore the previous one if you change your mind. Okay, here's one that comes up weekly, I feel like. Weekly, maybe, help desk. Why don't my sharing links work? Okay, here's one specific example. I shared this file 10 times and it's not working. My sharing link isn't working. So here's usually what's happening with that. When people go in to share something, so I think this is in OneDrive, but it's the same in SharePoint and Teams. So when you go in to share something, you are creating a special sharing link. So they can go in and kind of set their settings. This person's going to say, all right, I'm going to make this public to anybody at WSU, anyone in my organization. I need to copy this link and share that with my users for this to work. What people do sometimes, and maybe, weeks go by and a user says, I lost that link that you shared with me at one point. What they don't want to do is what this person's about to do here, grabbing that link from their actual address bar. This is not what you created to share with people. And what happens when you do that is that your users basically get an error. I took a little video of it here. Even though this was set for anybody at WSU, if I try to paste that into the browser, I'm going to get a big old, sorry, you don't have access message. So what do? They've called you, they've said it doesn't work. Getting them to their file options and manage access. Any link issue, by the way, not just this one, but links aren't working, manage access. And what you'll find there is the people they have shared with. So this person has allowed one person to view the file, but also looking at the picture on the right, the links tab. With this user, I found 10 links that she'd created. She didn't lie, she had shared the file 10 times, but she hadn't actually shared that link with anybody. So here's where you can go to delete extemporaneous links they've created, or changing any of the settings on the links, or copying the correct link to send to people. Now there's exceptions to everything in Microsoft's world. So there are some exceptions where that URL, that address bar URL will work. But if they're calling you with an issue, get yourself to the manage access options.
Ali, is there a way on the settings, like on the one on the left,
Yeah.
it says can view. Can you default that to modify?
The default set by your administrators.
Okay.
So, but you can change it when you're creating the link. So when you go into that gear,
Tired of changing every time.
yeah, you can't unless you're an administrator.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
Sorry, man.
But that will be for the entire tenant. That's the problem.
Oh, that is the problem.
Yeah.
I thought it was for my older.
No, once you change it on the admin side, it will be for the tenant.
It's probably said correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, I've already complained about Teams meetings, but I want to just point out a couple other things that can come up with Teams meeting recordings. Okay, first of all, where are they stored? That was the first question. I've had these come up now that there are expirations. This Teams meeting recording is expiring in 60 days. I didn't want that. I wanted to keep this forever. Or I accidentally shared my screen with a bunch of people and there was some private stuff on that meeting recording. Something is up with my meeting recording that I want to change. So my answer to that is the same as it was for where is my meeting recording stored. Getting to the link in their chat, because we're not going to remember that whole flow chart of where things are saved. And not only can you see where it's stored at the top, but as you scroll down, this is where you can change expiration. I've known that when users have told me that they have found some other ways to get rid of expiration. I can copy the file and I move it and then I move it back and then the expiration's gone. I think they don't know that it's just kind of a simple drop down in there. This is also a screen where you can get to the sharing settings. So second scenario, I shared my screen, there was private information on there, now there's a recording. You can get to that exact same manage access option that I just showed you from here. It's just in somebody's OneDrive, so it's the same sets of options. Okay, ceding ownership. So this came up a lot when there was a lot of turnover. I have a file stored in my OneDrive and I'm leaving and I need to get this to a team, or just generally needing to move content from cloud to cloud. I think a lot of people were using OneDrive for group projects before we even had Teams and SharePoint as options for them. So I had a faculty member that had a really intensive folder structure in her OneDrive that was just intended for sharing with students. We needed to get that to a SharePoint site. So I have two answers to this. The first one is using those move to and copy to options that you see next to a file. So both of them will take you to this screen on the right, which lets you pick any place in the cloud to move this content to. A team, a SharePoint site, my files is OneDrive. One thing to mention about this, and I don't know if this is going to matter to anybody, but the difference between move to and copy to is copy to will not keep version history. So if that's important to your users, I usually mention it. They've never cared, but you will lose that version history. This is method one. Method two. So I don't know if any of you all have tried to move content that had a lot of nested folders in it maybe and gotten a nasty message from Microsoft when you did so. This is what happened to us with this faculty member who had this intricate folder structure. So this is the one time I kind of step away from the browser and like to use that local sync option. So you know how your OneDrive has a local folder, that locally synced folder. You can do this with Teams and SharePoint too. So in Teams, you're looking in the ribbon for a sync option. Same thing in SharePoint. You'll see them in both places. And this is basically creating that same experience like you have with a locally sunk OneDrive folder. So see how I've got Wichita State University, you'll have your org name instead of your name as the OneDrive owner. And you can see a couple of SharePoint sites that I've synced locally. So this is nice when she has 5, 6, 7 structures of folders. You can just kind of copy and paste it a little more easily. One warning though, it will have to download and upload everything that you move. So just heads up about that. I got a nastygram from my cable company when I did that remotely. Oh, this is the bonus. So we have a lot of Google Docs addicts who are moving over to OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint. If they have a locally synced Google Docs folder and a locally synced OneDrive or SharePoint folder, and they're just kind of moving content around like that, there are some characters that Google Docs allows that are not allowed in Microsoft's land. This has happened 3 times. This seems like a very niche thing to be telling you, but it's come up for me 3 times. So what happens is they're moving those folders and suddenly OneDrive will say, I can't sync anymore. And it's because they've got an asterisk or some sort of character on that folder. So just a bonus, if someone's telling you, it says it can't sync anymore, that's the first thing I look for. You remove that asterisk, everything syncs. It's like magic. Well, tell Google that.
Ellie, is there a difference on a Mac too? Like, because you can't
the
start
same
a
for
file
iCloud.
with this.
The iCloud stuff will allow us to list characters also,
Yeah.
and the OneDrive doesn't. I was trying to sync up somebody's iCloud back into their OneDrive, and they didn't need for it to be an iCloud, and I had to go through and manually delete all these characters.
What's the difference between a Unix and a Windows file system? Unix lets a lot of different characters that Windows doesn't.
Oh, so it's not just Google Docs, it's iCloud.
Yeah, but so Mac
Mac
allows
and-
these by default.
Oh,
so
okay.
It doesn't.
And
So it could happen.
Linux-
Could happen with a lot more than just Google Docs then. Anyway, bonus tip. Okay, a couple more things I want to mention. I want to be sure I have time for questions too. If you're working with users who are using Microsoft Forms and Microsoft Lists, I have a suggestion for you because they can choose between OneDrive and Teams and SharePoint storage for their lists and their forms, but it doesn't show up in their documents. So they'll say, oh, I've got these forms, but where are they? I need to move this form from my OneDrive into a team or what have you. So for both forms and lists, I recommend going to the actual app in the waffle. So on the left here is my Microsoft 365 waffle going to forms. And then on the right is what that dashboard looks like. And you've got a toggle for my forms. These are all the forms in their OneDrive. And scrolling down, you'll see all of the forms they can access in a team or a SharePoint site. The other nice thing about going in here is you can move content from their OneDrive into a SharePoint site or a team using that move to group option. Same advice for lists. I recommend going to the lists app. They can be storing their lists local or in their OneDrive or in a SharePoint site or a team. You can actually see the name of where it's stored, usually somewhere near the title. My lists is OneDrive. But the bad news for you for lists is that you can't move them as of today anyway. You can't find a list and say, I want to move it from my lists into a SharePoint site. The unfortunate answer is it's just not within the capabilities, but there's ways around it. So if you have someone who has a 1,000-row list, you can export that list and re-import it in a new place. It's a bit of a pain, but they don't have to totally recreate it. Okay, just to recap, I hope that we decoded some of those 365 cloud storage options your end users have, OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint, how they're interconnected. We hit some troubleshooting. I still have a few minutes left for questions, but before I do that, this is the guide that I wanted to share with you. Wichita.edu/check24, QR code. Share it with your friends, read it light reading before bed, maybe, I don't know. And before I take questions, also wanted to acknowledge Dan, Amy, and Corby for information and inspiration in creating this. Okay, now questions.
This might be a little off topic, but how do you convince a end user to quit using the old Outlook and start using the new Outlook?
How do you convince me to stop using the old Outlook? Do you know that they keep moving the date? So originally they had a date where they were going to make the old Outlook to axe the old Outlook, and now they've taken that away. So here's my conspiracy theory. I think they're going to pull a OneNote with it. Remember when they tried to take away local OneNote app? I wonder if they're going to do that with Outlook.
Well, here's something I noticed when we disabled our network briefly during that situation, is that I had switched over to the new Outlook just to test it out. And it actually won't even load if you don't have network connectivity, because it's just loading
It's a progressive web app.
the web version in a box. So
Yeah.
it gives you a page can't load, and because it won't load, can't toggle back without going to the registry.
And you can't mail merge.
And you can't mail merge.
There's gonna be,
And half of the roles, my roles didn't work.
yeah, the rules, there's a lot of fewer rules. PST files don't work either, I think, right? So
Like there's nobody's gonna start using that until they get.
I think they have some work to do on that. That's the unofficial answer.
So people use the old Outlook.
Yeah. Other questions?
So one time I got into a recycle bin. I was trying to get to the second stage recycle bin, but I literally had to scroll for like 10 minutes. You know of any way to just go to
Classic view, I think, puts that, if you don't mind switching to classic view, on the left side of your screen, there's a little toggle. It takes you back to 1995, but you can get to that. I think it's just on the left menu then. Other than that, you just gotta scroll. Yeah, sorry, man. Other questions?
Did that.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming to this final session. I know your brains are full.